What happened to Of Mice and Men? I was hesitating for a long time to make this video because its theme is very specific and it only touches on one particular band. Reason behind it is simply because it's the band that got me into heavy music. Back in 2014, I was lucky to get introduced to Of Mice and Men. This band, it changed my perception of music completely. Before I was listening to much more softer music that includes some stuff like alternative rock or even worse, absolute garbage. The moment I listened to Of Mice and Men's Feels Like Forever, which is by no means a heavy song, it got me thinking that, well, this definitely sounds good and it sounds better than what I listened to. What is this band? I want to explore more. And that's pretty much the story. I'm not gonna make an analogy of getting from lighter drugs to heavier, but that's kind of what happened. From listening to more or less softer metal genres or chord genres, I found myself liking much more heavier stuff, and that was going on for quite a while, and I still like metalcore and hardcore music. So my question for this video is, what exactly happened to Of Mice and Men? And believe it or not, this video is not actually going to be just about Of Mice and Men, since a lot of bands out there kind of go the same path as Of Mice and Men did. What is one undoubted thing about music and pretty much anything in our lives? It changes, and it changes quickly, rapidly. But I think one important thing about change is that it has to be, first of all, reasonable, and second of all, it has to provide us with at least better music, or something that shows the progress of the band. What we call sellouts usually aren't really sellouts, it's more of musicians trying to discover new areas of music, discover new music for themselves. A lot of times it doesn't work out like they hope it will, but they just gotta try, because again, one of the worst thing in music, even worse than sellouts, is stagnating, is keeping the same old sound that doesn't really work in 2018. Now I'm not gonna touch on that because that's quite a different theme for another video. In this video we are going to talk about Of Mice and Men. This band was created in 2010 by a couple of friends that decided to make music, as it usually happens. Back in 2010, the band released their first self-titled album called Of Mice and Men, obviously because it's self-titled. Everything about that record is absolutely phenomenal. First songs of the band, they were absolutely great written, great instrumentals and lyrics. Together it sounded in a very, very specific way. But then again, I listened to it like 2 years ago because that's when I got introduced to this band and to the genre in general. So in 2010 they created this platform on which they continued to build the platform of loyal fans that like that edgy, emo-ish sound of post-hardcore. In 2011 they come out with a record, was also a really good one. The Flood did something that not a lot of albums do, was able to connect songs so well. This album is probably one of my favorite from Of Mice and Men. Now we move on to our new era of core music, which is Bring Me the Horizon era. In 2014, the band came out with Restoring Force, a big deal for this band because it was a borderline for the change. Ben changed not only the sound, but also the clean vocalist, who was before Shaylee Bourget, who has a very unique and very great voice, which you can listen to today. He still does music with his band Dayshell. Instead of him, there comes Aaron Pauley. As it usually happens with the bands of this genre, they tried to get more attention from more people and get their exposure. And they did. This album has sold the most copies of all of them. Restoring Force was the most successful record of the band. And I think it's fair because definitely The Flood and the self-titled album, not for everyone. Although Restoring Force, you can make anybody listen to their songs, and maybe they will like some of them. Again, this album had some problems. Despite being softer, it still had some heavier songs. The main thing it lost from the original Of Mice and Men sound is uniqueness. Album sounded like Of Mice and Men. A couple of songs in that album were just not as good as the others, and this contrast is definitely not a good thing. I could understand the band desired to become softer in order to become more popular. That's pretty much business. That's how music essentially works. It happened in the past. I'll assure you it will happen in the future as well. The band really tried to keep up with the trends and be more modern in the year of 2014. Then again, we had 2015, we had a deluxe edition of that album, but in 2016 we also got Cold World.
Never been here before. So frustrating, debilitating. This emptiness, there must be more. It's taking over me. I don't know what to believe. Forgetting everything that makes me.
This is probably the most problematic album, not only of the band, but of the genre in general. A lot of hate has to do with expectations, with high expectations. Not only it became much more softer than the softer album, it also became more lazier. I really highly respect Of Mice and Men as a group of musicians because I know for a fact they're very talented and they're not lazy at all. Although this album made me think otherwise. It can be understandable from the perspective of Austin Carlile, who had suffered from his sickness for quite a while, and that this sickness prevented him to sound and be like the old Austin Carlile from 2011. But before we go to the next generation, let's just dive into Cold World. To say the least, it's a very problematic record. Literally, me and everyone I know who I forced to listen to this album were just extremely bored. When the music becomes softer, you have to compensate with something else. For example, you have to make instrumentals more unique, you have to make lyrics more deep and stuff like that, because that's usually how it works. In this case, instrumentals were not really thought through. At least from my perspective as a listener, I was highly disappointed in this record. But then again, it's just my opinion and opinion of a couple of my friends. I don't know what you think about that album, but my personal opinion, that was a flop and that was a disappointment. In the beginning of 2017, the band came out with a couple of interviews to magazines and music channels on YouTube, where they mentioned that they won't be looking for any new vocalists since Austin is irreplaceable in the band and in their souls. Despite being a very little cute thing to say on an interview, it's actually pretty true. It was a very correct decision to keep the band going without new members in it. of 2017 they come out with Unbreakable, the new single with new vocalist because it's technically the old vocalist, the old clean vocalist Aaron Pauli, who not only plays bass now, not only sings clean vocals now, but also screams. 2018 Defy was not the perfect record. They tried to bring back the heaviness that they lacked in the previous ones. Now, the thing about 2018 Defy is that it definitely didn't get a lot of attention. It gained a bit more attention than the previous one, the Cold World, but didn't go as far high as Restoring Force or The Flood. It brings you to this question: what happened to Of Mice and Men, and what exactly happened to metalcore slash hardcore slash post-hardcore music? Again, I kind of answered it in the opening sentence. Music changes. We change, our perceptions change, our likeness changes, our friends change, everything changes. Music is not an exception, as well as our taste. And I think it's important to understand that bands really do want to move on from older stuff to become more and more diverse in music. So what happened to Of Mice and Men and quite a lot of other bands is they tried to do something different, to do something new. So my final thoughts on the whole sellout slash softening sound thing is we just have to kind of get on board, because it's 2018 finally and music changes. A lot of genres die and a lot of genres, they just stop existing, and we are lucky that metalcore and other core genres are still evolving and kind of finding their place in today's listener's ear. So yeah, I don't think they sold out. Thank you all for watching. Stay tuned. Be hardcore. Top-notch content.